Aha! This is Laborz, and it is so nice to have you here. These are the paints you need. Okay, let's start with removing the mod lines. We have two different sculpts for these soldiers, and both have some similar mod lines over the top of their skull, guns, and on the side of their legs. Use the dull part of your blade to remove this easily, and remember the golden rule, guys. Removing some of the details while getting rid of the mod lines is unfortunate, but it will always look better if the character has no ear with a smooth skull than an ear with a mod line running over it. After removing the mod lines, I primed the mini with Vallejo's Mecha Primer Black. Papa Laborz was in a bit of a pickle with these guys. They have some yellow areas over their green suit, and I wanted to paint them fast. I was thinking about using a white primer and paint the yellows with contrast paints. I could cover the yellow parts fast, but if I make a mistake later with the green parts, then I can't really fix the yellow with the contrast paints. So I had to use regular yellow acrylics paint to cover the green spillage, and that would end up in an uneven finish. So I decided to use black, but since I'm using regular acrylics, this method does not require using a black primer, because we will use all the base layer colors to be opaque as possible. However, if you use black and miss a spot or two on these guys, like in the armpit area or hard to reach areas, then it would look like a shadow in most cases. And if you use a high value primer like white, then those areas would be more visible like missed spots. At this step, I'm blocking in my base layers. I use intermediate green for the green parts of the suit. I give 2 coats of paint to have a nice and even coverage. Now guys, I cannot stress enough how important it is to make these layers perfectly even and opaque. It's like Granny's grey cataract. We don't want to see through it. I mean, she'd like to, but it's not happening. So if you need to add multiple layers of green, go for it, and you don't need to be super precise at this step. By the way, this paint covers over black very well, so you will have an easy time doing so. If you want to, you can leave a thin black line between the yellow and green parts to make them more defined, but since we have to paint 14 of these guys, it could be wiser to cut corners where we can. Next, I cover the yellow parts with gold brown. This ochre tone is covering quite well, and with 2 layers of the base layer consistency should be okay. I used a little bit thinner consistency unfortunately, so it took me 3 layers to cover these areas evenly, but use a little bit thicker one and you'll be done faster. It's also important to wait for your layers to dry before applying the next one. There are few things worse if you fiddle around too much with your brush over drying paint and create an uneven textured surface that you can't really fix later. Or maybe the blisters on Granny's back are worse than that, but be careful because uneven layers with bumpy textures can be discouraging. Now for the skin, I use Steel Legion drab with base layer consistency. I cover all the exposed skin all over the mini. It's a little bit hard to tell with all the teared up clothing over the skin which part is which, so I need to go back with green a couple of times to figure it out. With this step done, we got all of our base layers covered, and make sure you double check every single mini at this stage, so you don't have to go back fixing some areas because later it will be harder to do so, and I will slap on your tiny hand. Okay, our base layers are nice and opaque, but they lack contrast. Now we can use some washes and shade it down to create some splotchy shadows that doesn't look good. So instead of that, I'm using the Airbrush. I add 1 drop of paint to 7 drops of thinner, and I'm using royal purple. Wait, Papa Laborz, purple for shadows? Flowers in spring? I know guys, okay? I'm using purple a bit too much, and I contacted a group of anonymous painters that are addicted to purple shade tones, and as you can see, it's not really helping. Anyway, I aim my airbrush from below and I build up some shadow areas over the lower side of the character. This purple will add a lot more depth to our shadows and make it more interesting looking. I go over the inside parts of the leg and I try to catch the recesses of the abs while leaving the green to show through. It will also shade the ochre parts and will create some nice complementary shadows for these areas. If you want, you can use some blues as well, or reds. Both work, even some cold dark green, but green won't add as much depth to the suit. But you know, go for it, try it out for yourself, have fun, and after you realize green was a poor choice, get addicted to purple and use nothing else ever. Now we start the highlight process. We want to cover the highlight areas that are facing towards our light source and leave some recessed shadows with purple parts. Use thin layers for these highlights, so the airbrush surface wouldn't differentiate much from your new layer that you make with your brush. Check your layer consistency on your tiny hand, like Papa Laborz does, and build up these highlights with multiple layers. It's quite interesting how the colors change when we develop the shadow areas. At first, this green was a little bit pale, but now with the purple next to it, it looks more deep and interesting. See? Purple is the best. Now, my major highlight areas are the chest, shoulders, and any part of the mini that face towards our light source. So one of the thighs is like that, so I highlighted its surface. Same on the back with the hamstring and calves, but only if it's facing towards the light source, okay? For my second and last highlight of the green parts, I use lime green. Thin layer consistency again, and I build up these highlights over time, reducing layer sizes to create a smooth transition. If you keep the shadow, mid-tone and highlight ratio for these characters, you will reduce your painting time, so don't be afraid of leaving some bigger shadow areas. Lime green has lots of yellow in it, so it will create a warm film to the highlights and the purple shadows will become darker next to them. So we created a high contrast vibrant green suit with 3 steps, and I think they look quite okay. To highlight the yellow parts, I used flash gitz yellow. Thanks to a previous work with the gold brown and purple, yellow will cover quite nicely and blends on its own if you use the same approach like in the previous step, building up the opacity with thin layers. On the leather straps, I like to cheat that I sketch out a bigger part on the strap and just continue with some edge highlights next to my highlight sketch, okay? It creates a nice look and it's super fast. 2 rounds of thin layers should be enough to reach the maximum opacity for this layer. Next, I paint the eyes and teeth with ice yellow. Some of the eyes has some lens over them, so I skip those for now. Use base layer consistency and always go in from the sides to paint the eyes. It's a lot more easier that way. Once you're done with those, continue with the teeth and leave a tiny line between each tooth, if you can, to make them more defined. To paint the lens, I use gold brown and I paint a little dot into the corners with ice yellow to create a shiny glass effect. You can go more in depth with these if you want to do this lens to stand out more. You can check my Zombie Dr. Octopus video, how I painted his goggles. It works just as well in this case too. Also, I later realized that on the card they don't have lens over their eyes, but I think they do have lens over the eyes on the mini itself. I mix some gold brown and ice yellow to the Steel Agent drab to highlight the skin. I try to pick out the boys of the skin one by one to add more detail to them. I do the same on the mouth area, painting some fibers on the chin and the upper mouth areas. I'm using base layer consistency and leave some of the previous brown to show through. For the rifle and belt buckle, I use a neutral grey with a dry brush. Remove the excess on a paper towel and apply it gently over the surface. Don't apply any unnecessary force, okay? It's not like pulling Granny from the wheelchair to move her to the sofa so she can watch some soap operas, okay? It's quick and easy and you can catch the raised edges on the rifle to bring out the details. I know some of you may feel the urge to drill out the barrel of the rifle. This is PVC, not polystyrene, as the Games Workshop models. so it wouldn't look as nice if you try to do it. For the base, I use a mix of gunmetal and rough iron and cover the whole thing with base layer consistency. Always use a different brush and water pot for metallic paints, or I will slap on your tiny hand. Now I give it a wash of Nuln Oil and let the wash flow into the recesses. Wait for it to dry or borrow a hairdryer from Granny to speed up the process. I overbrush some gunmetal to catch the raised edges of the base and to highlight the Hydra symbol on the belt. I do some edge highlights over the base and I remove the excess from my brush if I were dry brushing. Try to get the raised parts of the textured base on the area that is front of the character. Next, I'm going to use some blood effects on the Mini, and for that, I'm using a very firm bristled brush. Like, these bristles feel like little wires rather than hair, but any brush with some good springy bristles could work. Dip your brush into the paint and use your fingers to create tension, and the snapback will create these natural splatter patterns. I aim these over the legs and the base. Try it out first on a paper towel to see if you like the pattern it creates before you do it on the Mini. Less is more here, and I apply it more over the shadow areas. First I'm using dry blood, and then I switch to true blood. Dry blood dries to a matte finish, and true blood to a glossy one. These are awesome blood effects, so thanks one of my students, Glitchy Macrash, for recommending these paints. With that, the Hydra soldiers are done, and I hope you will have some fun painting them. If you are interested in some PDF tutorials for different characters of the game that won't receive a video guide, consider joining my Patreon page. A huge thanks to my Patreons who support this kind of videos, with special shout out to Cold-Blooded Dom, Trying to Paint Minis, Jonathan Mosner, Glitchy Macrash, Penoman45, and Michael Kerr. I hope your day will be as smooth as a granny's butt cheek.